The gender war will not stop until schools start teaching relationships. Here's the thing, right? We teach young people almost everything, right? I remember learning math, right? So I can learn how to calculate. We were taught science, right? So we understand how the world works. We were taught history, so we don't repeat the same mistakes and stuff, right? We were taught a lot of things when I was in school, right? But they don't teach this one subject, right? And that subject is, as we know, a relationship, right? And then we act surprised when they grow up like confused and frustrated and like angry at the opposite sex. And I think gender war, like for example, right? It's not just happening because people are worse than they used to be. It's because they nobody really learned how to connect or how to have a relationship, right? And here's the thing, these are not optional skills, right? These are the difference between a life of connection and a life of loneliness, right? Between raising children who feel secure and, raising children who spend their 20s trying to undo the damage. But we don't teach any of it, right? Like, mention one class, like, not even one class, right? They're not even required. The classes don't even exist, right? And instead, we teach trigonometry, which most adults just never even use in their life. I learned trigonometry and I never used it as an adult. Maybe some adults use it. So, yeah. But here's the thing, trigonometry when I was in school was not like a choice, it was like forced too. And it's funny that I just still never really used it. So, if schools aren't teaching relationships, where do people actually learn it? Not from one place, right? There's no this one institution that teaches them, but people kind of learn it from like everywhere, kind of. And I think that's like the problem. For example, first of all, people tend to learn a little bit from their parents, right? If you have a parent, of course, like how they talk to each other, right? Like how they fight, how they handle silence, right? But even that is like very inconsistent between people. People have like very different parents, right? So some people grow up watching healthy relationships, some people don't. Some people just grew up watching like, arguments, tensions, right? And resentments, right? And I think a lot of people don't realize that they're kind of copying their parents. And then people also learn from entertainment. Movies tell you, like if you watch movies, the love is supposed to often like very effortless, right? That like if it's right, then it just works, right? No awkwardness, no miscommunication, right? No effort at all. It just works, right? And for music, it's often like intensity, right? There's like this very high highs, right? Low lows, right? Often the music has a lot of like drama, obsessions, right? Yeah. And it kind of makes like instability feel like passion, right? And social media as well. People learn from social media too. There are positive ones. For example, sometimes there are like one of those like highlight reels where like perfect couples, right? Uh, it's basically like a couple's social media with like perfect trips, like perfect moments, right? Both are attractive, right? And that kind of makes real relationships feel less amazing. And then there's also porn too. And a lot of young people, when it comes to intimacy, right, they kind of learn from there as well. And yeah, but here's the thing, a lot of the social media or like porn and stuff, right? It's not really real, right? It's kind of like a performance, right? It's scripted. It's kind of exaggerated a lot of the time, and no one really sits you down and explains the difference, right? And finally, the most aggressive teacher of relationships is gender war content. I like to call content creators about that make negative gender war, negative content about gender. I call them gender grifters. And this is the only place that like directly talks to like confused, frustrated young people, right? They give them answers, right? Like very simple answers, and they often give them enemies as well, like usually the opposite gender, right? If you're a guy struggling with dating, they tell you like, oh, it's the women are the problem, right? Women are hypergamous and stuff, right? If you're a girl who's been hurt, it tells you like, oh, all men are like assholes, right? All men are cheaters and stuff, right? And yeah, I think for a lot of young people, when they see those, it feels like, I think to them it makes sense at the time, and but it definitely comes with a big cost, right? Because instead of teaching them how to connect with the opposite gender, how to understand each other, right? It teaches you to just distrust them, right? If you look at most of these gender war contents, most of these gender grifts, they're not teaching them to connect with each other. They're teaching them to distrust each other, right? It's often very, very negative. It's very hard to find positive ones. And they start blaming the opposite gender for this, right? And once you start seeing the opposite sex as like an enemy, right? Every interaction kind of becomes like a battle. And that's why I call it the gender war, right? And now I can already hear like a lot of people are gonna have objections, right? You can't teach relationships. What are you talking about, man? It's too personal. It's the parents' job. It's too cultural. It's too complicated. Like, why would schools teach this, right? And here's my answer to this, right? Yes, first of all, yes, parents should definitely teach their kids how to have a healthy relationship, right? But here's the thing, man. How, many parents don't have a healthy relationship themselves. How are they going to teach their children to have a healthy relationship when they themselves don't have a healthy relationship? And parents themselves a lot of the time never learned how to have a healthy relationship either, right? How can you teach others what you never learned, right? And second of all, okay, relationship education doesn't mean telling students like what to believe, or like it's not like giving them tools to figure out for themselves. It can look very different in the practice, right? Like we could teach like communication skills, right? And how to express what you need without attacking, how to listen without defending, right? How to ask for what you want, and like how to say no, right? Or how to hear no, right? These are teachable skills, I believe. And there are curriculum for this that already exists, right? We use them like in corporate trainings and stuff, like in therapies or whatever, right? We just don't use them in schools, right? And when I say teach, I don't just mean like, like reading a book and then just like writing essays or whatever. I don't mean that, like real practice. That's what I want, right? And another thing we should definitely teach is how to resolve conflicts, right? How to apologize, how to forgive, how to repair after harm. And these are not intuitive, right? You have to learn them, right? You don't just you're not just born and just learn them, right? A lot of parents don't even know these. Like, look at your parents. Do you think all they are doing all of these? No, right? Another thing we should teach is boundaries, right? What are like and responsibilities in a relationship. We have to be taught that and how to do those, right? And we should definitely be graded for them, I believe. So yeah, uh, another thing that I should talk about, schools should talk about, is healthy and unhealthy dynamics in a relationship, right? What does respect actually looks like? What does manipulation looks like? How do you tell the difference between someone who's going through a hard time, right? Yeah, and these are pattern recognition skills, and I do believe we can be taught. Another thing is we should definitely be taught is the difference between love and infatuation, right? Like a rush of excitement in the first 3 months, right? It's not really love, right? It's kind of like biology, right? And so yeah, those are things that many people still don't know. People still don't know. Parents don't know this either. And nobody explains you these type of things, right? Yes, sometimes parents tell you some things, but they don't tell you like everything, right? And so yeah, and yeah, there's probably other objections to this as well, which is like, this will turn into ideological indoctrination and stuff, right? And it doesn't really have to be that way, and you know the reason sex education became controversial is that it got pulled into culture wars, right? And relationship education, I think, can be different, right? Maybe we can just stick to skills, right? We don't have to like make it into ideology or like politics. We can just focus on the skills, right? And I think that could also be a much better way to solve this. And another thing that people might say is like, oh, kids aren't gonna take it seriously, right? Obviously, kids won't take it seriously. But let's be honest. Yeah, I get it. Some probably won't. Like, but here's the thing: people don't take math seriously either. Nobody takes English seriously either, right? But some do, and some make it work, right? I'm not saying everybody will like take it seriously and it'll be perfect. I'm not saying that, right? Like, obviously there's gonna be people who are not gonna care about this, right? Obviously there's gonna be some schools who don't teach it very well, and yeah, I get it. But it's the same with other classes too, right? So yeah. And another thing that people might say is like teachers aren't trained for this. Well, they could be if we start training them for it, right? If we start training them for it, I'm sure we would eventually have teachers who are good at it, right? We just choose not to teach them, right? Yeah, and another thing that you might say is this takes time away from academics. Yeah, but so does sports, right? So does sports. So does bands, right? So does everything else we've decided that matters. They all take time away from academics, right? The question is priorities, right? Like, we gotta get the priorities straight, right? Right now there's a population crisis, right? That means we gotta take this thing seriously, right? It's a big priority now, right? So I don't think we should treat it as like, oh, it's just gonna be uh, affecting badly in the academics. No, I don't think it will. It might actually make things better. So my vision is basically, okay, imagine this, okay? Here's my vision, okay? If we get this right, I know it'll be very difficult to teach this in school, I get it. But if we do get this right, imagine a generation of young people, right? Like, let's imagine young men who don't need Manosphere content, right? Right? Imagine that. Imagine how amazing that sounds, right? Imagine a generation of like young women, right, who don't need like feminist grifters to tell them how to, like, do this and that, right? Imagine they already know on their own on how to handle their relationship without being radicalized by gender grifters. How amazing that sounds, right? Just imagine that, right? And imagine young people who can have hard conversations with the opposite gender without accusing them, right? Without generalizing them, without like dehumanizing the opposite gender, right? Like, how amazing that sounds. To me, that feels so amazing to think about. And yeah, also imagine gender war channels going out of business. Imagine just like, people like, who's like a famous manosphere guy, Andrew Tate. Imagine him just not existing. Imagine him being like a joke. How amazing does that sound to you? It sounds utopian, right? You know, our modern life was considered utopia like back 200 years ago, and we made it happen. So we can make it happen, guys. We can make it happen, okay? Cars were considered like impossible, and we made it happen, okay, guys? So we can make this happen too. So, yeah, I don't think this is that impossible. But another thing that you guys need to consider is that the stakes for relationships are higher, right? A bad relationship, a country with people who are having bad relationship is way worse than, you know, a country where, like, you know, people don't know, like, geometry or something, right? Like, only some people need to know that, right? But relationships, everybody needs to know this, okay? Everybody. So yeah, in conclusion, I would like to say that, yeah, gender war is not gonna stop because one side wins, okay? That's not gonna happen. No one side is gonna win out of this gender war, okay? It will not stop, okay? It will stop when young people walk into adulthood with something that they learned in school, which is how to connect with each other, okay? And right now we can see that people don't have those. People don't know about relationships. And look where we are now. Population crisis everywhere. And I don't, to me, it's not surprising to me. Like, we never took it seriously enough to teach in school, right? And obviously this was going to happen. To me, this was just like, well, this is definitely gonna happen. And I think we actually gotta start taking it seriously and actually start considering to teach this in school. And it doesn't have to be like in school either. Maybe like in college we can make it work too. We can make it work in universities too, or maybe there can be academies for it. We have an anger management classes, guys. Come on, we can have relationship classes, okay, guys? So yeah, and thank you for listening to me. And if you have other video ideas that you want me to say, let me know.